5 Gundams just entered the Warhammer 40K universe, and the Imperium of Man already wants them dead. The Battlefleet Gothic vessel, Sword of Terra, was running a standard patrol through the Segmentum Obscurus when reality broke. Not bent, not distorted, broke. The void ahead of the ship's prow split open like a wound receiving a blade from the wrong side. Not the familiar, nauseating tear of a warp transition. Not the specific horror of a chaos incursion, bleeding demonic energy into real space with the particular wrongness that every naval officer in the Imperium had been trained to recognize and respond to with immediate, overwhelming, theologically motivated violence. This was different. This was something the warp had no fingerprint on, something that the ship's Geller field did not react to. It's something that the navigator aboard felt not as the soul-deep wrongness of the immaterium, but as the specific, physical sensation of a universe being asked to accommodate something from completely outside its architecture. The void broke, and 5 lights came through it, massive, humanoid, moving with the directed, purposeful aggression of things that had arrived somewhere and were already assessing it. Senior Void Master Kalen Thrace had been serving in Battlefleet Gothic for 19 years. Had survived the Gothic War. Had been present at 3 Chaos incursions, 2 Orkware events, and 1 encounter with a Tyranid splinter fleet that she did not discuss and that appeared nowhere in her official service record, because the Administratum had determined that what she had witnessed exceeded the psychological tolerance parameters for documentation. She had never seen anything like the 5 shapes that the Void had just produced. She had 4 seconds to look at them before training replaced observation. "Battle stations," she said. "All weapons free. Unconventional contact. Classification unknown. Purge immediately." The Sword of Terra opened fire. Macro cannon batteries, lance strikes. Every weapon the ship carried discharged simultaneously at the 5 contacts with the total, committed, in unambiguous violence of an Imperial vessel whose doctrine contained exactly 1 response to unknown contacts in Imperial space. And that response was not dialogue. The 5 contacts moved, all of them, simultaneously, out of the firing solution and into positions that the ship's targeting cogitators had not calculated as available based on the contact's observed velocity profiles, which meant the velocity profiles were wrong, which meant everything the targeting solution had been built on was wrong, which meant the macro cannon shells hit empty space. The lance strikes hit empty space. Everything hit empty space. Void Master Thrace looked at the targeting display. The 5 contacts were now behind the Sword of Terra. She had not seen them move. "Throne of Terra," she said quietly. Then Wing 0 fired. The beam that hit the Sword of Terra's port engine cluster was not, and every tech priest who analyzed the sensor data afterward spent considerable time documenting this specifically, was not plasma, was not laser, was not any energy type in the Adeptus Mechanicus's comprehensive catalog of known weapon systems. It was a compressed particle column that interacted with the ship's void shields in the specific way of a weapon that had not been designed in awareness of void shields and was therefore not constrained by the tactical assumptions that void shield-aware weapon design produced. It went through the void shields, not around them, not over the shield threshold, through them, treating the void shields the way light treated smoke, acknowledging their presence and continuing. The port engine cluster ceased to exist, like the Sword of Terra listed. Voidmaster Thrace grabbed the command pulpit and looked at the damage assessment that her ship's systems were producing, and then looked at the tactical display that was showing her the 5 contacts, still there, still moving toward her ship now with the specific directional intent of things that had made a decision about where they were going. She activated the distress signal. Then she activated the emergency prayer broadcast on all frequencies, which was the thing that Imperial Navy officers did when they had activated the distress signal and were not certain the distress signal was going to matter. The signal went out across the segmentum obscurus with the compressed urgency of a priority extremis transmission. The classification that the Imperium reserved for threats that exceeded the response capacity of local assets, that required the attention of forces that were not already in the area, that represented a category of problem that needed more than what was present to address it. The segmentum's command infrastructure received it, began responding. And in the 5 cockpits of the 5 machines that had just disabled an Imperial warship in approximately 90 seconds, 5 pilots looked at the universe they had arrived in and felt, each in their own way, the specific quality of a place that was different from everywhere they had ever been. Hero Yui looked at the sensor data. Wing Zero was assembling from the environment around them. The data was wrong, not inaccurate. The sensors were functioning correctly, were producing readings that accurately reflected the environment they were measuring. Wrong in the sense of describing an environment that was not consistent with any universe the pilots had previously occupied. The warp signature that permeated everything, the specific dimensional energy that the 41st millennium ran on, that existed in the space between real space and the immaterium as a constant background structural feature of the universe's physics, was registering on Wing Zero's sensors as something that had no classification, that the suit's computer was filing under unknown field effect and flagging as requiring monitoring. It was everywhere, in the stars, in the void, in the disabled ship drifting ahead of them, in the space between all of these things like a second atmosphere that the universe wore underneath its visible surface. "Something is wrong with this place," Quattro said. His voice carried the specific quality of the empathic sensitivity that made him the squad's most accurate reader of environments. Not wrong in the tactical sense, not wrong in the sense of immediate threat, but wrong in the deeper sense of a place that was fundamentally, structurally different from any place he had pointed his perception at before. The empathic channel was producing input that it had no framework for, not the emotions of people. He was getting those, could feel the crew of the disabled ship with the specific texture of minds running on fear and faith and the particular zealotry of people who had organized their entire psychology around service to something vast and distant and absolute. What was wrong was what was underneath that. "The void itself," he said. "It's alive." "Operationally irrelevant," Hero said. "Hero, it hasn't affected suit function. It's irrelevant until it does." He looked at the distress signal his sensors had detected transmitting from the disabled ship. "They're calling for help." "Of course they are," Duo said. "We just shot their engine off." "More will come," Troa said. "Yes," Hero said. "Many more," Wu Fei said. He was running his own assessment of the signal's priority extremis classification, the translation matrix that Wing Zero systems had begun building from the electromagnetic environment since their arrival was incomplete, but sufficient to convey that the transmission was urgent, was directed upward in whatever command hierarchy this faction operated, and was going to produce a response that was going to be significantly larger than one warship. How do we stop it from becoming a war? Quattro asked. Hero looked at the disabled ship, at the universe around it, at the stars that burned in the specific way of stars in a place where reality had a second layer that was trying to get through it constantly, where the boundary between the physical and something else was thinner than physics should allow, and was held in place by will and faith and the accumulated psychic weight of 1 trillion human beings believing in the same thing simultaneously. We probably can't, he said. He said it the way he said things that were true and that he had no intention of using as an excuse not to act. So we deal with what comes, he said. What came was the Imperium of man, in all its terrible, magnificent, absolutely overwhelming entirety. The first response force translated out of warp transit 40 minutes later. 3 battleships, 9 cruisers, and a Space Marine strike cruiser bearing the markings of the Ultramarines chapter, arriving in the specific coordinated formation of a military force that had been fighting for 10,000 years and had refined the architecture of overwhelming response into something that was less a tactic than a theology. The formation was breathtaking. The scale of it, the sheer mass of Imperial warships occupying the void around the 5 Gundams, with the comprehensive authority of a civilization that had been building ships for 10 millennia and had never once considered that bigger was not better, communicated something that went beyond tactical threat assessment into the territory of statements about the nature of power and what happened to things that stood against it. Hero looked at the formation. The formation looked at 5 mobile suits. Then the Ultramarines strike cruiser opened a channel. The voice that came through it was not the voice of a naval officer, was not the voice of anyone whose relationship with combat was professional rather than fundamental. It was the voice of a Space Marine, a being that had been engineered beyond the baseline human in every physical parameter and had then been trained for decades and then had been fighting for decades more. A voice that carried the specific quality of something that had looked at death so many times that death had stopped being a reference point and had become a background condition. Unknown contacts, it said. You have attacked an Imperial vessel. You will stand down and submit to inspection by the authority of the God Emperor of mankind. Non-compliance will result in immediate and total destruction. You have 30 seconds, Duo's voice on the squad channel. God Emperor of mankind. Yes, Hero said. That's new. Yes. 30 seconds isn't a lot of time to have a theological discussion. No, Hero said. 25 seconds. He looked at the formation, at the strike cruiser, at the specific energy readings his sensors were producing from the Space Marine vessel. Readings that included the psychic signatures of beings aboard that were not standard human, that were registering as something that Wing Zero's classification system was filing under enhanced biological and flagging as significant. 20 seconds. Stand down, Quattro said on the squad channel. Not as a question, as a statement of what he thought they should do. If we stand down, Wu Fei said, we are at their mercy. If we don't, Quattro said, we are at war with something we don't understand in a universe we don't understand. 15 seconds. Hero made the decision. Weapons safe, he said. All suits, weapons safe. Do not fire unless fired upon. 4 confirmations came back. He opened the external channel to the Imperial formation. This is Hero Yui, he said. Pilot of Wing Zero. We are standing down. We did not come here to fight you. The vessel we disabled fired first. We responded to protect ourselves. He paused. We want to talk. 10 seconds. The channel was silent for 8 of them. Then the Space Marine voice came back. "Talking," it said, "is not how the Imperium responds to heresy." The formation opened fire, and that was when the real war began. The Imperium fired everything, simultaneously. 3 battleships, 9 cruisers, 1 strike cruiser. Every weapon they carried discharged in the coordinated, total, absolutely committed way that the Imperial Navy discharged weapons when it had designated a target for destruction and had not designated it for anything else. No suppression, no warning shots, no graduated escalation of force. The Imperium did not do graduated escalation. The Imperium did overwhelming finality, and it did it with the particular conviction of a civilization that had been doing it for 10,000 years and had never once questioned whether overwhelming finality was the correct default response to things it did not understand. The void between the formation and the 5 Gundams became light. Macro cannon shells traveling at significant fractions of light speed. In lance strikes, cutting across the engagement space in straight, brilliant lines that burned the retinas of anyone who looked directly at them. Torpedoes launched from the battleships in coordinated spreads that filled the approach vectors with munitions whose individual yield could crack a hab block and whose combined yield could crack a moon. Everything at 5 mobile suits. The 5 Gundams moved, not away, through, the same response that had broken the sword of Terra's targeting solution, the same reading of firing solutions in the preparation rather than the execution, the same movement into the gaps between overlapping fields of fire that existed because overlapping fields always had gaps, and 5 pilots who could read those gaps faster than the cogitators, calculating them, could always find them. Almost all of them. Wing 0 took a glancing macro cannon shell to the left shoulder assembly. Not a direct hit. The targeting cogitator's solution had placed the shell 4 meters to Wing 0's left, and Hero had moved 3 meters right, and the math had produced a glancing impact that the suit's armor absorbed with the specific stress signature of equipment at its design limit doing its job. The shoulder assembly held. The armor cracked. Hero noted the damage reading, filed it under manageable, kept moving. "They're not adjusting," Troa said. His voice carried the specific quality of someone identifying a tactical pattern while executing combat maneuvers simultaneously. The dual processing of a pilot whose attention had been trained to operate on multiple levels. The targeting solutions aren't recalibrating between shots. They're firing fixed solutions and reloading. "Their cogitators are slow," Wu Fei said. "Slow is relative," Duo said. Death Scythe was moving through the torpedo spread with the active cloak cycling. The stealth system, making the suit invisible to the torpedo's proximity, fuses in the specific way of a technology that the torpedo's targeting architecture had not been designed to account for. "They're still firing a lot of very large things at us." "Then we reduce the number of things they can fire," Hero said. Wing 0's twin buster rifle charged. Not at the battleships. The battleships were the most heavily armored vessels in the formation, were the Imperial Navy's expression of the philosophy that enough armor made every other consideration secondary, and the buster rifle, at full capacity, would damage them, but would not remove them from the engagement in the time available. The cruisers. The targeting architecture of the formation's fire was coordinated through the cruiser formation, the battleships providing mass fire, the cruisers providing the targeting coherence that made the mass fire directed rather than random. Remove the targeting coherence. The fire becomes random. Random fire against mobile suit targets that could move faster than targeting cogitators recalibrated was fire that would eventually miss entirely. he fired at the cruiser formation. The beam hit the lead cruiser's communications array, not the hull, not the weapons, the specific component that was transmitting the targeting coordination signal to the rest of the formation. The array ceased to exist. See, the cruiser's void shields had been angled for hull protection rather than communication array protection, because no naval architect in the history of the Imperium of Man had previously needed to consider that a single enemy unit would target communications arrays rather than weapons or propulsion. The formation's fire degraded immediately, not stopped. Degraded, the coordinated volleys becoming slightly less coordinated, the overlapping fields developing gaps that were slightly wider, the targeting solutions arriving slightly later than they had been arriving before. Slightly was enough. Heavy arms filled the gaps with Troa Barton's complete, tireless, absolute commitment to the principle that enough sustained fire against enough targets across enough time produced outcomes regardless of the individual target's resilience. The rotary cannon worked through the cruiser formation with the specific patience of a pilot who had learned that patience and relentlessness were not opposites. That you could be both simultaneously, that the combination was more dangerous than either alone. 3 cruisers lost propulsion, 2 lost weapons. 1 lost everything at once when a lucky burst hit the plasma reactor cooling system, and the reactor did what plasma reactors did when their cooling systems were removed from the equation. The explosion was visible from the planet 3 light minutes away. 6 minutes, Quattro said on the squad channel. His voice carried something underneath the tactical report, the empathic channel registering the deaths aboard the cruiser as a specific, felt weight. The loss of hundreds of individual presences that his perception had been tracking as points of awareness and that were now not there. He did not allow it to stop him. He had learned, across years of fighting wars that cost more than he had wanted to pay, that feeling the cost and continuing were not mutually exclusive. That the feeling was important and the continuing was necessary, and the space between them was where he lived. We've been in this universe for 6 minutes and we've already killed. I know, Hero said. They fired first, Wu Fei said. I know that too, Quattro said. It doesn't change what it costs. The squad was quiet for a moment. Then Sandrock moved back into the engagement, and the moment was over and the war continued because wars continued, regardless of the cost of them. The Space Marine strike cruiser had not fired during the exchange. It had held position at the formation's edge, watching, its weapons charged, its targeting solutions updated continuously by the battle brothers aboard who were running assessments of the 5 contacts with the specific analytical capability of warriors who had been fighting unknown enemies for centuries and had developed, through that fighting, the particular instinct for identifying the critical variable in an unfamiliar engagement. The critical variable was the pilots. The suits were formidable, were beyond formidable, were operating at a level of capability that the Battle Brothers' tactical assessment ranked above any single human-scale weapon system in the Imperium's arsenal, and comparable to the lower range of Titan-class war engines. The suits were the problem. But suits were machines. Machines had pilots. Pilots were human. Humans were vulnerable. The strike cruiser detached a boarding torpedo. 1. Moving on a trajectory that the ongoing battle had covered, aimed not at the suits themselves, but at the space between them, at the gap in the formation that the suits' evasive patterns had repeatedly returned to as a coordination point, fired with the specific, practiced patience of a chapter that had been boarding enemy vessels for 10,000 years and understood that the most effective route to destroying a machine was through the person operating it. The boarding torpedo hit Wing Zero's hull. The breaching charge activated. The hull opened, and 12 Ultramarines entered Wing Zero's exterior chassis. Hero felt the impact before the sensors confirmed it. The suit registered the breach as a structural alert on the damage display. External hull compromise. Deck level 4. Breach diameter consistent with forced entry. He processed the information in the 0.4 seconds between the alert and the tactical response it produced and understood immediately what it meant. They were inside his suit, not inside the cockpit. The cockpit was sealed, armored independently of the external chassis, protected by systems that existed specifically to maintain pilot integrity against exactly this category of threat. But inside the exterior structure, in the maintenance corridors and the mechanical spaces and the chassis infrastructure that gave Wing Zero its form and function, 12 Ultramarines in power armor, with bolters and combat blades, in his suit. "Hero," Quattro said immediately. He had felt the change, the empathic channel registering 12 new presences aboard Wing Zero, with the specific, focused, absolutely committed quality of beings who had been engineered and trained for 10,000 years toward a single purpose, and were in the process of executing that purpose. "There are people inside." "I know," Hero said. "What do you—" "I know," he said again. He looked at the tactical display, at the ongoing engagement around him, at the squad managing the Imperial formation's reduced but continuing fire, at the strike cruiser that had fired the boarding torpedo and was now moving, positioning itself for a second shot, for a second torpedo, for the systematic boarding of every suit in the formation with the patient, methodical thoroughness of a chapter that had made thoroughness a form of worship. He made a decision. Stopped Wing Zero. Complete stop. Thrusters to zero. All evasive movement ceased. The suit holding position in the engagement space with the specific vulnerability of a machine that was no longer using the mobility that had been keeping it operational. "Hero!" Duo's voice, sharp. "Hold your fire," Hero said. To the squad, to the Ultramarines inside his suit, to the engagement in general. He opened every external channel he had. The Imperial frequencies, the emergency bands, the compressed burst transmission that Wing Zero's systems could produce on the widest possible signal spread. "This is Hero Yui. I am stopping. I am not fighting. I have 12 of your warriors inside my suit. If you fire on Wing Zero, you kill them." He paused. "I am asking you to stop. I am asking you to talk. I am asking you to look at what is happening here and decide if this is the outcome you want." The engagement continued around him for 11 seconds. Then it stopped. Not all at once. In the sequence of a military force receiving a command it had not anticipated and processing the command through its chain of authority before executing it. The cruisers ceasing fire first, then the battleships, then the remaining formation elements, the engagement space going quiet in the gradual way of something winding down rather than the instant way of something stopped. The strike cruiser held its second torpedo. Then the channel opened, and everything changed. Because the voice that came through the strike cruiser's channel was not the battle brother who had spoken before. It was different, older, it carrying the weight of something that had been alive for a very long time, and had been alive at a level of intensity that most living things did not sustain. carrying also something that Quattro felt through the empathic channel the moment it spoke. Something vast and focused, and looking at the 5 suits with a quality of attention that was unlike anything that had looked at them since their arrival. "I am Marneus Calgar," the voice said, "Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, Lord of Macraga." Hero looked at the strike cruiser. "I know what you are," Calgar said. Hero said nothing. "You are not Chaos," Calgar said. "You are not Xenos in any form my chapter's archives contain. Your technology is not Dark Age. Your weapons are not warp-touched." A pause. "You are human. I can see it in the way you fight. In the decision you just made." Another pause, longer. "Only a human stops a battle to save enemies inside his machine." "Only a human," Hero said, "or someone who values life." "In this galaxy," Calgar said, "they are the same category." Then the warp screamed. Every psyker aboard every ship in the engagement space, every navigator, every astropath, every battle brother with even a marginal psychic sensitivity felt it simultaneously. Felt it not as sound, but as the specific, total, full-body wrongness of the Imperium, doing something that the Imperium was not supposed to be able to do to real space without the specific conditions that allowed it. The conditions were present. The engagement, the deaths, the violence, the fear, the emotional intensity of a battle that had lasted 6 minutes and killed hundreds, had fed the warp with exactly the kind of psychic energy that the entities in the Imperium fed on. Had created, in the space around the engagement, a thinning in the barrier between real space and the warp that was not a full breach, but was approaching one with the specific urgency of a process that had momentum. The void tore, not the dimensional tear that had brought the Gundams through. The specific, nauseating, soul-deep tear of a warp breach. The boundary between real space and the Imperium, failing at the engagement's center, and the warp beginning to pour through with the particular character of something that had been pressing against a barrier and had found it suddenly weakened. Demons came through first, dozens of them, then hundreds. Yet the chaos entity that followed them was not something that had a name in any language that the Gundam pilots knew, but it had names in every language of the 41st millennium, and all of those names were warnings. Calgar's voice came through the channel immediately. "Yui." "I see it," Hero said. "Can your weapons affect warp entities?" Hero ran the assessment in 1.1 seconds. Wing Zero's sensors were registering the demons as energy constructs, as beings whose physical form was sustained by the warp energy that composed them, whose vulnerability profile was entirely different from physical matter, and whose combat parameters had no equivalent in any enemy the Gundams had faced before. Unknown. "I don't know," he said. "Then we find out together," Calgar said. And for the first time in the engagement, for the first time since 5 Gundams had torn through a dimensional boundary and started a battle they had not wanted, the Imperial formation and the 5 mobile suits were pointed in the same direction, at the same enemy. And the real war had only just revealed itself. The demons hit the Imperial formation like a tide, not a metaphorical tide, the specific, physical, overwhelming quality of a force that was not organized in the way that military forces were organized, that did not have formation doctrine or targeting priorities or the logical structure of a military assault. It had hunger, the collective, undirected, absolute hunger of entities that existed in the Imperium, as expressions of everything that organic life felt at its most extreme, and that had found in the thinned barrier around the engagement space, a door into real space that the violence and the fear and the deaths of the last 6 minutes had opened for them. They came through that door with everything the warp had given them. The bloodletters hit the hull of the nearest cruiser and tore through it with brass blades that interacted with physical matter in the specific way of things that had been made in a dimension where the rules of physical matter were suggestions rather than laws. The hull did not simply breach, it came apart, the metal failing along lines that physics had not put there, that the demonic blades had inscribed into the material at a level below the molecular. Horrors of Tzeentch cascaded through the void between ships, their forms cycling through configurations that the human eye could not track and the mind could not retain. Their energies discharging in bursts that hit the void shields of the battleships and did not interact with them the way energy interacted with void shields, went through them the way the twin buster rifle had gone through them, treating the shields as if they were not there because the shields had been designed for real space threats, and the horrors were not entirely real space. The Ultramarines aboard the strike cruiser deployed immediately. The speed of it was remarkable. 12 seconds from the warp breach to Space Marines in vacuum, the chapter's response time reflecting 10,000 years of fighting exactly this kind of incursion in exactly the conditions that made it most dangerous. They came out of the strike cruiser in Terminator armor, the massive tactical suits making them effectively small tanks in the void, their storm bolters firing blessed rounds that hit demonic forms and produced the specific damage that mundane rounds did not produce. The psychic charge in the bolter shells interacting with the warp energy that sustained the demons and disrupting the coherence that kept them manifested. Demons died. Not enough of them. More were coming through the breach with the continuous, accelerating urgency of a process that had found the conditions it required and was exploiting them before the conditions changed. The barrier between real space and the warp was not a static thing, was not a wall that was either intact or broken, was a dynamic system that responded to the psychic environment around it, that thinned when the environment fed it and thickened when the environment starved it. And the environment around the engagement space was currently feeding it with everything it needed. Fear. The Imperial crews were afraid. Not the manageable fear of soldiers in combat, the specific, deeper fear of people encountering the warp's direct intrusion into real space. The fear that the 41st millennium's 10,000 years of horror had written into the human genome at the level of instinct. The fear that said, this is not a thing that can be fought with weapons and tactics and courage. This is the universe trying to consume you. That fear was food for the warp, and the warp was getting stronger. Hero looked at the breach, at the demons pouring through it, at the Imperial formation fighting them with blessed rounds and faith and the specific, absolute commitment of warriors who had trained for exactly this and were finding that training and the reality of it were two different things at a scale that made the gap between them feel like a chasm. He looked at Wing Zero's weapon systems, at the twin buster rifle, at the energy readings the suit's sensors were producing from the demonic entities, the warp signatures, the specific frequency of the Imperium energy that was sustaining their physical forms, the vulnerability profile that was different from every enemy the suit had been designed to fight. Different, not incompatible. "Katra," he said, "here. Can you feel them?" A pause that was not hesitation. The pause of someone who was already doing what they were being asked about and was finding the answer in the doing, rather than in the thinking about the doing. Yes, Quattro said. His voice had the quality it got when the empathic sensitivity was operating at full capacity, fully open, fully receiving, taking in the emotional and psychic content of the environment without the filtering that normal perception used to make experience manageable. They're not thinking, they're not feeling, they're just wanting, Hero said. Yes. What do they want? Everything, Quattro said. Everything alive. Everything that feels. They want to consume it. All of it. There's no limit to it. There's no point where they stop wanting. A pause. They can't stop. It's what they are. Hero processed this. Then they have a center, he said. Everything that wants has a center, a source. The wanting comes from somewhere. The breach, Quattro said immediately. The breach is the source. As long as it's open, they can keep coming. As long as they keep coming, the fear keeps building. As long as the fear keeps building, the breach stays open. He paused. It's a cycle. Break the cycle, Hero said. How? He looked at the breach, at the specific geometry of it, the dimensional scar in the barrier between real space and the Imperium, sustained by the psychic energy of fear and violence and death, requiring that sustenance to remain open the way a fire required fuel to remain burning. Remove the fuel. Not the fear. He could not remove the fear from human beings encountering demonic incursion, could not tell the Imperial crews to stop being afraid of something that was genuinely, specifically, cosmically terrifying, could not remove the deaths, could not undo the violence, but he could change what the violence was feeding. The demons, he said, stop killing them. Silence on the squad channel. Then Duo. Hero. Stop killing them, Hero said. Don't engage, don't fire. The deaths are feeding the breach. Every demon we destroy releases warp energy back into the breach and keeps it open. We stop killing them, and we starve the cycle. And while we're not killing them, Wu Fei said, with the specific quality of someone identifying the critical flaw in a plan, they are killing the Imperial crews. Yes, Hero said. That's not acceptable, Quattro said. No, Hero said. It's not. Which is why we have 12 seconds to find a different solution before the alternative is letting the breach grow until it doesn't matter what we do. 11 seconds. He opened the channel to the strike cruiser. Calgar. The chapter master's voice came back immediately. Yee. The breach is sustained by the psychic energy of the engagement, Hero said. Fear, violence, death. The more we fight the demons, the more energy feeds the breach, and the more demons come through. He paused. We need to close the breach from the inside. A pause. From the inside, Calgar said. Yes. You're describing entering the warp, Calgar said. The specific quality of his voice on those words carried the weight of everything that statement meant in the 41st millennium. The accumulated horror of 10,000 years of what happened to people and ships and everything that entered the warp without the specific protections that the warp required. Nothing enters the warp voluntarily and returns. Nothing that has entered from this universe, Hero said. We came from outside this universe's physics. The warp's rules may not apply to us the same way. Another pause. Longer. May not, Calgar said. Yes, Hero said. May not. He looked at the breach, at the light coming through it, not the light of real space stars, but the specific, wrong, beautiful, terrible light of the Imperium. The the light of a dimension that ran on psychic energy and emotion, and the distilled essence of everything that living things felt, rendered visible in real space through the breach with the quality of something that was not light and was not dark, but was the specific in-between of a dimension that contained both and transcended both. 9 seconds. He made the decision. "Quatre," he said. "You're with me. The rest of you hold the breach perimeter. Don't let more demons through while we're inside." "Hero," Quatre started. "Your empathic sensitivity is the only navigation tool I have in there," Hero said. "You can feel the warp. You can feel what the breach is connected to. You can find the point where closing it is possible." He paused. "I need you." Quatre was silent for a moment. "Yes," he said. "If this doesn't work," Duo said, and his voice had the quality it only had in the moments where the grim, irreverent balance went entirely to grim and stayed there. "I want it on record that I had significant objections." "Noted," Hero said. Then Wing Zero and Sandrock flew into the warp. The inside of the Imperium was not a place. That was the first thing that Hero's perception registered and immediately failed to fully process. The specific impossibility of an environment that did not have the properties that made something a place. No consistent geometry, no stable spatial relationships, no reliable physics. The area around Wing Zero shifted continuously, not in the way of weather or turbulence, not in the way of an environment that was changing while remaining itself, but in the way of something that was different, things simultaneously, and was not choosing between the different things, but was all of them at once. The observation of it, not resolving it into consistency, but collapsing it into the specific version of itself that the observer's mind produced. The warp looked like what you were afraid of. Hero looked at it, and it looked like war, like the specific, total, endless war that had defined his existence since childhood, rendered in the visual language of the Imperium, with the particular horror of something that knew exactly what it was drawing from. And the sky above Wing Zero, if sky was the word, was the color of the Earth sphere burning. The ground, if ground was the word, was the specific texture of a battlefield after the battle, the particular landscape of things that had been alive and were not anymore. He moved through it. Wing Zero's sensors were producing readings that the suit's computer was classifying as non-functional, not because the sensors had failed, but because the environment they were measuring did not have stable enough properties to produce consistent measurements. The readings changed between sampling cycles. The distances changed between measurements. The only consistent data was the power readings. Wing Zero's reactor was stable. The systems were running. The suit was operational. They were in the warp, and they were intact. "Left," Quatre said. Hero turned left. Sandrock was moving beside him with the specific, careful navigation of a pilot who was being guided by something other than instruments. Quatre's empathic sensitivity extended fully into the Imperium's psychic environment, reading the currents of the place with the perception that had been designed for human emotional landscapes, and was finding, in the warp, the most intense and concentrated version of those landscapes imaginable. "The breach is connected to a node," Quatre said. His voice carried the strain of operating the empathic channel at full capacity in an environment that was composed entirely of exactly what the channel perceived. Emotion and psychic energy rendered physical, the distilled essence of everything organic life felt, concentrated and amplified and made into the fabric of a dimension. A collection point. The fear from the engagement is flowing to it. The demons are flowing from it. If we destroy the node, the breach closes, Hero said. Yes. How far? Close, Quattro said. And getting closer. A pause. Hero, there are things in here that are aware of us. Hostile? Everything in here is hostile, Quattro said. But these are aware, specifically aware, watching us, deciding. Hero looked at the warp around him, at the shifting, terrible, beautiful landscape of a dimension that had been watching humanity for 10,000 years and had found, in the 5 Gundams' arrival, something new, something from outside its architecture, something that did not carry the psychic signature that everything else in this universe carried, but something that the warp could not read with the complete certainty that it read everything else. There, Quattro said. The node was ahead of them. It was not subtle. It was a concentration of warp energy so dense that it had acquired a physical form, a mass of light and darkness, and the specific emotional residue of hundreds of deaths, pulsing with the rhythm of the breach it was sustaining, connected to the real space engagement by a channel of psychic energy that ran from the node through the breach like a vein. Hero raised Wing Zero's twin buster rifle. Full capacity, Quattro said. The node is reinforced. It's... Hero, it knows we're here. It's going to... Something vast moved in the warp behind them. Not a demon, not one of the entities that had come through the breach. Something larger. Something that had been in the Imperium for longer than the Imperium had existed, that had looked at 2 mobile suits entering its dimension and had made the specific, unhurried decision of something that was not threatened but was curious, that wanted to see what happened when it pressed against these new things from outside its familiar architecture. It pressed. The psychic pressure hit Wing Zero like a physical impact, not against the suit, against the pilot, against Hero Yui, against the specific, absolute, stripped-down consciousness of a person who had removed every internal obstacle between his will and his action, and had been running on that removal for so long that it had become the definition of who he was. The pressure was looking for fear, for doubt, for the crack in the will that the warp used to enter a mind the way water used a crack in stone, not forcing, finding, the patient exploitation of the gap that was already there. Hero felt it searching, felt it finding the architecture of his mind and moving through it with the specific comprehensiveness of something that had been reading human minds for 10,000 years. Felt it stop. The vast presence in the warp stopped pressing. Not because it had been repelled, because it had found what was in Hero Yui's mind and had encountered in the place where fear and doubt lived in every other human mind it had entered. Something that was not fear and was not doubt and was not any of the materials the warp used to build its influence. Just the mission. The specific, clean, absolute present tense commitment to the thing that needed to be done right now with the available resources in the available time because it needed to be done. And he was the one who was here. No past, no future, no fear of either, just the mission. The vast presence was still for a moment. Then it moved away, not in defeat, in the specific behavior of something that had reached for a thing and found it was not there. Not a wall, not a defense, just absence. The specific absence of what it had been reaching for. Hero fired. The twin Buster rifle at full capacity hit the warp node with everything Wing Zero's reactor could produce, and the node did something that warp nodes, in the 10,000 years of the 41st millennium's history, had never been documented doing. It came apart cleanly, not an explosion, and not the release of accumulated warp energy in the catastrophic detonation that warp node destruction usually produced. A clean dissolution, the psychic energy that had been concentrated in the node dispersing back into the Imperium without the explosive release, because the energy of the weapon that had destroyed it was from outside the warp's architecture and did not interact with the node's energy in the way that warp native weapons interacted with it. The connection to the breach severed. The breach began closing. "Out," Hero said. Wing Zero and Sandrock flew toward the closing breach. They cleared it with 1.7 seconds remaining before it sealed. Behind them, the Imperium closed, and the demons in real space, cut off from the warp energy that had been sustaining their physical manifestation, disconnected from the dimension that had given them form, began to dissolve. Slowly. Not instantly, not the dramatic vanishing of things that ceased to exist simultaneously, but the gradual, irreversible dissolution of things that were losing the coherence that kept them present, that were becoming less solid and less real, and less anything with each passing second until they were not there. The engagement space went quiet, really quiet, the specific quiet of a battlefield after the battle, not the tactical quiet of a pause between engagements, but the genuine, complete quiet of a conflict that had ended and was not going to immediately resume. Marneus Calgar's voice came through the channel. "Yui." "Yes," Hero said. "You entered the warp," Calgar said. Yes." Voluntarily. "Yes." A pause that was longer than any previous pause from the chapter master. The pause of someone processing something that exceeded his framework's capacity to process quickly. "And returned," Calgar said. "Yes," Hero said. Another pause. "In 10,000 years," Calgar said, "I have never seen that." Hero looked at the space where the breach had been, at the Imperial formation around them, damaged, reduced, carrying the evidence of the last 40 minutes in the state of its ships and the silence of its crew, at the 5 Gundams intact in the middle of it. "We need to talk," Hero said. "Yes," Calgar said. "We do." The galaxy was already burning, not metaphorically. The 41st millennium burned as a matter of ongoing policy, burned in the way of a civilization that had been at war for 10,000 years and had organized every aspect of its existence around the continuation of that war, that measured peace not as a state to be achieved, but as an interval between conflicts too small to require full mobilization. The Imperium of man burned worlds that fell to chaos, burned worlds that fell to Xenos, burned worlds that fell to heresy, which was a category broad enough to include almost anything the Administratum found inconvenient. The Astronomicon burned at the heart of Terra, the psychic lighthouse that kept the Imperium ships navigating the warp, sustained by the deaths of thousands of psychers daily, and the will of the Emperor on his golden throne, yet alive and not alive, and holding the darkness back through the specific, terrible, continuous effort of something that had been doing it for 10,000 years and would keep doing it until it couldn't. The galaxy burned, and the 5 Gundams were in the middle of it. The meeting aboard Marneus Calgar's strike cruiser lasted 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was sufficient to address everything that needed addressing. It was not close to sufficient, was barely enough to establish the most basic framework of mutual comprehension between 5 pilots from a universe with different physics and a chapter master who had been fighting the Imperium's wars since before any of the pilots' home universe had the concept of mobile suits. It lasted 4 hours because 4 hours was what the situation allowed before the next crisis made the discussion irrelevant. Calgar sat across from Hero with the specific quality of someone who had fought enough enemies to have developed the ability to assess them accurately and was currently applying that ability with full commitment. The chapter master was enormous. Space Marine enormous, the specific scale of a being whose biology had been engineered past the baseline human in every dimension, augmented further by the Terminator armor he had not removed for the meeting. He made the room feel smaller than it was, and made the 5 pilots look smaller than they were, and did both of these things without apparent effort because they were simply true. He looked at Hero. Hero looked back. "You are not from this universe," Calgar said. No," Hero said. "Your weapons function against warp entities." He said it the way he said everything, as a fact established by observation, without the qualifying language that uncertainty produced. This is not something that happens. The warp's entities exist partially outside real space physics. Standard munitions interact with them partially at best. Our weapons are not standard munitions, Hero said. No, Calgar said. They are not. He looked at the 5 pilots in turn. You are human. Your suits are machines, but your technology operates at a level that nothing in this galaxy's human civilization has achieved since the dark age of technology. He paused. And your pilot entered the warp without a Geller field and returned. I don't know what a Geller field is, Hero said. A barrier, Calgar said. A psychic barrier that prevents the warp from entering a vessel's real space integrity during transit. Without it, the warp consumes everything aboard. He looked at Hero with the specific quality of assessment that went past tactical into something more fundamental. You had no barrier. The warp touched you directly. Another pause. And found nothing to hold. I was focused on the mission, Hero said. Calgar looked at him for a long moment. In 10,000 years, he said again, I have never seen that. Then the alert came through. The signal that reached the strike cruiser's communications array was not the standard priority extremis of the earlier distress transmission. It was something that existed above priority extremis, a classification that the Imperium used so rarely that 3 of the 4 human officers present had never seen it in active use and had encountered it only in historical records of events significant enough to warrant its activation. Vermilion priority. Throne-level emergency. The content of the signal took 14 seconds to decrypt, even with the strike cruiser's cogitators operating at full capacity. And when the decryption completed, and the communications officer read the content, and then read it again, and then looked at Calgar with the expression of someone who has confirmed something they had hoped to disprove, the room changed. Not physically. The quality of the air changed. Kadia, Calgar said. The communications officer confirmed it. Abaddon, the Despoiler's 13th. Black Crusade had begun. The War Master of Chaos. The being that the Imperium had been preparing for and dreading for 10,000 years. The heir of Horus, who had led 12 Black Crusades against the Imperium and had been driven back 12 times at costs that had reshaped the galaxy's geography in the ways that only truly catastrophic wars reshape geography, had emerged from the Eye of Terror with the largest Chaos fleet assembled since the Horus Heresy itself. Kadia was under attack. not a raid, not an incursion, an extinction-level assault, the full, committed, apocalyptic application of everything that Chaos had been building toward since the Imperium's founding, aimed at the fortress world that stood between the Eye of Terror and the Segmentum Solar, aimed at Terra. The aimed at the Emperor on his golden throne and the 10,000-year war that the golden throne's occupant was the center of. If Cadia fell, the Eye of Terror expanded. If the Eye of Terror expanded, the warp tore through real space across a front that extended from one side of the galaxy to the other. If the warp tore through, how long before Cadia's defensive perimeter fails? Hero asked. Calgar looked at him. The look carried something that Calgar's face did not usually carry. The specific weight of a warrior who had looked at the tactical picture honestly and had arrived at an answer he was not willing to say aloud, because saying it aloud made it a fact rather than a possibility. Days, he said, without significant reinforcement. Days. Hero looked at his pilots. The squad channel was open. All 5 of them had heard the transmission, had run their own assessments of the tactical picture with the flat, functional attention of people for whom tactical assessment was not a professional skill, but a survival instinct. Duo's voice, quiet. That's not our war. No, Hero said. We came here by accident. We don't owe this galaxy. Duo, Quattro said. I'm saying what we're all thinking. You're saying what you're thinking, Quattro said. What I'm thinking is that there are people on Cadia. Billions of them. Soldiers and civilians and children who have been born on a fortress world and have lived their entire lives under the shadow of what's coming for them. He paused. And we are here with the ability to affect what happens to them. We are 5 suits, Wu Fei said. Yes, Quattro said. See, and you saw what 5 suits did to a 100-ship Imperial formation. Silence. Not the silence of disagreement. The silence of people who had already arrived at the conclusion and were in the moment before saying it aloud. The specific silence of soldiers who knew what the next thing was going to be and were taking the breath before it. Trawa, Hero said. Yes, Trawa said. One word, the shortest possible confirmation of the longest possible commitment. Hero looked at Calgar. Take us to Cadia, he said. Cadia was already dying when they arrived. The fortress world had been built for exactly this, had been engineered and fortified and garrisoned across 10,000 years, specifically to receive the worst thing that Chaos could produce and hold against it, long enough for the rest of the Imperium to respond. Its pylons, the ancient Necron structures that suppressed the warp's influence on the surrounding space, still stood. Its walls, the Cadian Gate fortifications that made the word wall insufficient, that required the word mountain, still stood. Its soldiers, the Cadian shock troops, the finest human soldiers the Imperium produced, warriors born knowing this war was coming and trained since childhood to fight it, still stood. Everything still stood, but it was standing by inches. The Chaos Fleet filled the void above Cadia in numbers that made the 100-ship formation of the earlier engagement look like an advanced patrol. Thousands of vessels. The specific, wrong, corrupted profiles of ships that had been sailing in the warp long enough to absorb its influence into their hulls, that were simultaneously ships and something else. That carried in their presence the specific atmospheric wrongness that warp proximity produced. They were firing continuously. The orbital bombardment, not the precision targeting of an attack with strategic objectives, but the comprehensive, indiscriminate assault of an attack whose objective was destruction itself, whose intent was not to capture Cadia, but to break it, to grind it down under the weight of everything the Eye of Terror could produce, until nothing remained that could resist. Abaddon's flagship was at the center of it, the Vengeful Spirit, the ship that had been Horus's flagship, the ship that the War Master of Chaos had claimed as his own, that had sailed in the warp for 10,000 years and had absorbed 10,000 years of chaos into every plate of its hull and every system of its architecture, until it was not simply a ship, but an expression of everything that chaos was in physical form. Hero looked at it through Wing Zero's sensors, at the scale of it, at the fleet around it. Then he looked at Calgar, whose strike cruiser had translated into the Cadia system alongside the reinforcement fleet that the Vermilion Priority had assembled, the largest single Astartes deployment in the sector's history, chapters arriving from every reachable system. Now the Imperium's full military commitment converging on the fortress world with the specific urgency of a civilization that understood that this was the battle it had been building toward for 10,000 years. "Where do you need us?" Hero asked. Calgar looked at the tactical display. "At the Vengeful Spirit." "The flagship," he said. "Abaddon commands from the Vengeful Spirit. His presence is what holds the Crusade's different war bands together. The Chaos factions do not cooperate naturally, do not share objectives or authority except under the specific pressure of his will. Remove him from the equation." "The Crusade fragments," Hero said. "Yes." "And your fleet can handle fragmented warbands." "Yes." Hero looked at the Vengeful Spirit, at the thousands of ships between them and it, at the 5 mobile suits. "We'll need a path through the fleet," he said. "I'll make one," Calgar said. The Imperial fleet's charge toward the Vengeful Spirit was the largest single military movement in the Cadian system since the battle began. Every available capital ship, every strike cruiser, every escort and destroyer and frigate that the reinforcement fleet had brought committing simultaneously to the assault vector that Calgar had identified. It was not subtle, was not designed to be subtle, was designed to be exactly what it looked like, the full, committed, overwhelming application of Imperial force against the largest concentration of chaos in the sector. The statement in military language that this was the moment, and this was the will, and this was not going to stop. It drew everything. Every Chaos warship in range turned toward the Imperial charge. To every demon engine, every corrupted vessel, every warband's contribution to the fleet that Abaddon had assembled moved to meet the Imperial assault with the reactive aggression that Chaos always met overwhelming force with, not with tactics, with the specific, pure violence of entities that had been distilled from the most extreme expressions of organic aggression and had nothing in them that moderated that aggression when provoked. The void between the two fleets became fire, and in the gap that the fire opened, in the space that thousands of Chaos vessels moving toward the Imperial fleet had vacated, the corridor that the collision had created between the edge of the engagement and the Vengeful Spirit, 5 mobile suits flew at maximum speed. They were not subtle either. Wing Zero at the front, Death Scythe to port, our active cloak cycling. Heavy arms to starboard, rotary cannon clearing the smaller vessels that the main engagement had not occupied. Sandrock and Ultron flanking. Quacher reading the engagement's emotional architecture and navigating toward the paths that the fear and the violence had cleared. Wu Fei driving forward with the specific, focused, absolute commitment of someone who had decided that justice was the word for what they were doing and was doing it completely. The smaller vessels in the corridor tried to stop them. Wing Zero's path through them was a geometry problem solved at combat speed. The specific trajectory of a pilot who had already identified the minimum number of opponents that needed to be removed to maintain forward momentum, and was removing exactly those opponents with exactly the force required. Not more, not less. The twin buster rifle at 40%, targeted specifically, economically, with the absolute precision that was Hero Yui's most dangerous quality. Not his speed, not his power, but the specific elimination of wasted action that made everything he did feel inevitable rather than impressive. 4 minutes. They cleared the corridor. The vengeful spirit filled Wing Zero's viewport. Up close, it was worse than the sensors had suggested. The 10,000 years of chaos influence visible in the hull not as damage, but as transformation. The ship having been altered by its time in the warp, the way all things were altered by extended warp exposure. The alterations producing something that was simultaneously ship and cathedral, and wound and monument to something that the human mind registered as wrong at the deepest possible level. It was also the size of a city, a large city. "Breach point," Troa said. He had already run the structural analysis during the approach, heavy arms sensors mapping the hull for the specific location that offered minimum resistance to forced entry. Port aft section, former maintenance access, now structurally compromised by warp exposure. The hull is thinner there than anywhere else on the ship. "By how much?" Duo asked. "Enough," Troa said. It was enough. Wing Zero's twin buster rifle at 60% opened the breach. They went in. The interior of the vengeful spirit was the interior of the warp given architecture, not the shifting, formless immaterium that Hero and Quattro had flown through. The warp rendered into corridors and chambers, and the specific geography of a ship, but a ship that had absorbed 10,000 years of chaos into its structure, until the structure and the chaos were the same thing. The walls moved, not metaphorically. The bulkhead shifted. The corridors rearranged themselves between steps. The geometry of the ship's interior following rules that were not architectural. Chaos Space Marines met them. Not the Ultramarines' disciplined, coordinated deployment. The specific individual, glorying in the violence, aggression of warriors who had turned from the Emperor's service 10,000 years ago and had spent those 10,000 years in the warp becoming more completely themselves at the expense of everything that had made them human. They were enormous, were dangerous, were carrying weapons that had been in the warp long enough to be warp weapons, bolters that fired rounds with demonic aspects, blades that existed partially in real space and partially in the immaterium. The Gundams were larger and better armed. Hero moved through the Chaos Marines the way he moved through everything, with the economy of someone who had assessed the threat correctly and was applying precisely the response it required. Not brutally, not with the warrior's joy that the Chaos Marines brought to their own violence, with the specific, clean, functional directness of someone who had somewhere to be, and these were in the way. They were not in the way for long. "Bridge," Wu Fei said. "Abaddon will be on the bridge." "Not the bridge," Quattro said. Everyone looked at Sandrock. "He's not on the bridge," Quattro said. His voice carried the specific quality of the empathic channel, operating at full extension, reading the ship, reading the presences in it, finding the one that was different from everything else. The one that was not simply a presence, but a presence within a presence. The specific doubled quality of a being who was host to something, who carried something in them that went beyond individual consciousness and into the territory of something that had been in the warp for 10,000 years and had fused with the being carrying it completely. He's below the bridge, deep in the ship, in a chamber that... A pause. Hero, the chamber has warp exposure that makes everything else in this ship look like ambient. Whatever is in there is Abaddon, Hero said. Yes, Quatra said, and everything he carries. We go, Hero said. Like they found the chamber at the ship's center. It was not a bridge or a command room or any of the functional spaces that military ships organize their command functions around. It was something older, the space that had been at the heart of the vengeful spirit when it was still Horus's ship, before the Horus heresy, before the long war, before 10,000 years of chaos had made the distinction between the ship and its passenger academic. Abaddon the Despoiler was there. He was enormous in the way that Calgar was enormous, and in additional ways that Calgar was not. The chaos blessings that 10,000 years in the warp had layered onto his original Space Marine physiology, having produced something that exceeded the Space Marine template in every direction. That was more than the template had been designed to produce, and different from it in ways that the template had not been designed to accommodate. The talon of Horus gleamed in one hand, the lightning claw taken from his mentor's corpse, the weapon that had killed the Emperor in the Horus heresy, and that carried that history in its energy signature. Drachnyan was in the other, the demon sword that screamed in a register that was not sound. He looked at 5 mobile suits standing in the heart of his flagship. And the specific quality of his attention was not the tactical assessment of a commander evaluating a threat. It was recognition. From outside, he said. His voice was wrong in the specific way that a voice was wrong when the thing using it was not entirely the thing it appeared to be. When the consciousness behind the voice was shared between a person and something that had been in the warp for 10,000 years and had become, through that sharing, something neither and both. You are from outside this universe's architecture, he said. The warp cannot read you completely. It has been trying since you arrived. A pause. I have felt it trying. Then you know what we did to your node, Hero said. Yes, Abaddon said. You destroyed something that should not be destroyable with technology from this universe. He looked at Wing Zero. Because your technology is not from this universe. A pause. This is why you could enter the warp without a Geller field. This is why the warp's entities dissolve under your weapons. And you are not subject to the rules that govern everything in this galaxy, because you were not made by those rules. Then you know what the Twin Buster Rifle will do to you, Hero said. Abaddon looked at him. The specific, ancient, terrible quality of his attention was fully present. 10,000 years of war and chaos, and the Long War's absolute commitment to the destruction of the Imperium, focused on a pilot in a mobile suit from a universe he had never known existed until today. Yes, Abaddon said. I know. He attacked. The talon of Horus hit Wing Zero's left arm assembly, and the energy of it, the specific, warp-charged energy of a weapon that had killed the Emperor, interacted with Wing Zero's armor in the way that warp-native weapons interacted with real space material from outside warp physics. Differently. Not as badly as it would have interacted with an Imperial suit, but differently from what the armor was rated for. The arm assembly held, cracked, stressed at points that the structural readings flagged as critical, but held. Hero fired. The twin-buster rifle at full capacity hit Abaddon in the chest. The despoiler staggered, not fell, staggered. The chaos blessings that had layered onto his physiology, absorbing a portion of the impact that would have been lethal to anything else. His armor cracked. The warp energy that sustained the enhancements flickered. Draknian screamed louder. He raised the talon. Wu Fei moved first. Ultron's dragon fangs extended past Wing Zero's position and hit Abaddon from the flank. Not the talon side, the other side. The side that the attack's momentum had exposed. Near the specific targeting of a pilot who had read the attack in its preparation and had positioned for the response before the attack landed. The dragon fangs wrapped, held. Abaddon fought them with the full, terrifying power of a being that had been in the warp for 10,000 years and had absorbed 10,000 years of chaos into every aspect of his existence. It was not enough. Ultron was a Gundam. Wu Fei held. And in the moment that Abaddon's attention was divided, the Talon committed to Wing Zero, Draknian unable to reach Ultron's position, the specific tactical vulnerability of a combatant fighting two opponents from separate vectors simultaneously. Hero fired again, full capacity. The second shot hit the Talon of Horus, the weapon that had killed the Emperor. The Talon came apart, not in the explosion that warp weaponry usually produced when it was destroyed, in the specific, clean dissolution that Wing Zero's weapons produced against warp-native objects. The energy not detonating, but dispersing. The 10,000 years of accumulated chaos in the weapon bleeding away into the Imperium through the breach that the impact had opened in its structure. Abaddon looked at his hand, at the space where the Talon had been. The silence in the chamber lasted 4 seconds. Then the ship shuddered. Then it shuddered again. Then the vengeful spirit systems began failing, not from the engagement in the chamber, not from anything the Gundams had done to the ship's structure. From the fleet outside, where the Imperial charge had engaged the Chaos Armada and was pressing it with everything the Imperium had brought to Cadia, and where the Chaos Warbands, receiving fragmented, conflicting tactical signals as their commander's presence was interrupted, as the coherence that Abaddon's will provided to the coalition of factions that had never cooperated except under his specific authority began to break down, were starting to do what Chaos Warbands did when the authority holding them together failed. They were turning on each other. "The crusade is fragmenting," Quattro said. "Yes," Hero said. He looked at Abaddon. The despoiler was still standing. The chaos blessings were sustaining him. The warp energy that had been layered onto his physiology for 10,000 years, continuing to function, even without the Talon, even with the Draknian unable to bring its full power to bear. He was damaged. He was not finished. But the crusade was fragmenting. And a fragmented crusade without its War Master's coordination was not an extinction-level threat to Cadia. It was something the Imperium could handle. Hero lowered Wing Zero's rifle. Abaddon looked at him. "You could kill me," the despoiler said. "Yes," Hero said. "Why don't you?" Hero looked at him, at the 10,000-year enemy of the Imperium, at the War Master of Chaos, at the being that had launched 13 Black Crusades and had built the Long War into something that had defined the 41st millennium's entire existence. At the person underneath all of it, the Space Marine who had been before the heresy, before the Long War, before 10,000 years of the warp. A person. Because the crusade is over, Hero said. The objective is achieved. Killing you now would be additional action beyond the mission. He paused. I don't take additional action beyond the mission. The vengeful spirit shuddered again. Your ship is compromised, Hero said. Withdraw or die in it. That's the choice. Abaddon looked at him for a long moment. The 10,000-year-old hatred in his eyes was real and was not going anywhere, and would not go anywhere as long as he existed. The long war was not over. The 13th Crusade had failed, had been broken by an Imperial fleet and 5 mobile suits from a universe that should not exist, and Abaddon the Despoiler was standing in the ruins of it, with the Talon of Horus gone, and Drachenyen howling and the vengeful spirit's hull failing around him. He withdrew, not with the dignity that the word implied, with the specific, rage-compressed movement of something that was choosing survival over pride, because survival made the next attempt possible, and pride did not. The vengeful spirit pulled back. The Chaos Armada, without its central coordination, fought itself for 40 minutes and then fled into the warp in fragments. Individual warbands making the calculation that the campaign was lost, and that surviving to fight again was the only objective that remained. Cadia held. The aftermath took 3 days. 3 days of recovery operations and damage assessment, and the specific, grinding work of a battle's conclusion. The accounting of what had been lost. The treatment of what had survived. The beginning of the rebuilding that would take years, and the recording of what had happened that would take longer. When the 5 Gundams sat at the edge of the Cadian system and watched it. Calgar came to them on the 2nd day. Not officially, not in the formal capacity of a chapter master conducting a post-engagement review. He came in a shuttle with 2 Ultramarines and no ceremony, and sat across from Hero in Wing Zero's maintenance bay with the specific quality of someone who had something to say and had decided to say it directly. The Talon of Horus, he said. You destroyed it. Yes, Hero said. It was created during the Horus heresy, Calgar said. 10,000 years ago. Every weapon we have fired at it in the 3 major engagements where it has appeared has failed to damage it. Our most powerful relics, our strongest psychers, he paused. You destroyed it in a single shot. Our weapons are not subject to this universe's warp physics, Hero said. Yes, Calgar said, and that is the question I came to ask you about. He looked at the 5 pilots. How long are you staying? Hero looked at his squad. At Duo, who was running maintenance on Death Scythe with the focused attention of someone using physical work to process things that weren't physical. At Trawa, who was sitting against Heavy Arm's foot and looking at the stars with the specific quality of someone who was present everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. At Wu Fei, who was training, running the combat forms that his tradition prescribed for the period after a significant battle. The physical practice of something that was simultaneously discipline and memorial. At Quatre, who was looking at Hero with the expression of someone who had been feeling the answer to that question for 2 days and was waiting for it to be said. We don't know how to get home, Hero said. No, Calgar said. But do you know how you arrived? Dimensional transit, Hero said. Uncontrolled. We don't have the mechanism for a controlled return. The Mechanicus might, Calgar said. There are Archmagos on Mars who study dimensional phenomena, who have been studying them since before the heresy, who have archives on dimensional physics that predate the Imperium itself. He paused. It would require trust, on both sides. Hero looked at him. "You're offering us Mechanicus access," he said. "I'm offering you the Imperium's resources," Calgar said, "in exchange for yours." He paused. "Your weapons affect things in this universe that ours cannot affect. Your pilots enter the warp and return. Your technology functions outside the constraints that govern everything we have." He looked at Hero directly. "The Imperium has enemies that those capabilities could address. You have a problem finding your way home that the Imperium's resources might help solve." "It would take time," Hero said. "Yes," Calgar said. "We would not serve the Emperor," Hero said. "We would not fight for the Imperium as a matter of faith or authority. We would determine our own objectives." "Yes," Calgar said. Hero looked at him. "Why?" he asked. "Why offer this? The Imperium does not extend trust. That everything I've seen of this galaxy in 3 days tells me that the Imperium extends authority, or it extends destruction and nothing in between." Calgar was quiet for a moment. "Because Cadia held," he said. "Because the Talon of Horus is gone. Because Abaddon withdrew." He paused. "Because you entered the warp to close a breach that was consuming my soldiers, and you asked nothing for it." He looked at Hero with the specific quality of a warrior who had been fighting for 10,000 years and had developed, through that fighting, the ability to recognize the particular thing that made a person worth trusting. "You are not fighting for the Imperium. You are not fighting for the Emperor. You are fighting because there are people who need protecting, and you are capable of protecting them, and you have decided that is enough reason." He paused. "In this galaxy," he said, "that is rarer than any weapon." Hero looked at the stars, at the Cadian system around them, still burning at its edges, still carrying the evidence of what had almost happened, still standing. "We'll stay," he said, "until we find the way home." Quatra exhaled, not relief, confirmation. Duo looked up from Death Scythe's maintenance panel. "So we're staying in Warhammer 40K, he said. "In the Grimdark universe where everything is trying to kill everyone all the time, and the good guys are barely distinguishable from the bad guys, and the entire galaxy has been at war for 10,000 years. He paused. "Great, cool, this is fine." "Duo," Troa said. "Café is still fine," Duo said. "Completely fine." Wu Fei stopped his training forms, looked at the stars. "Justice," he said quietly, "does not ask about the difficulty of the terrain." The squad was quiet for a moment. Then Hero looked at the stars, at the 7-dimensional disturbances that Vader had shown them in the Star Wars galaxy, and then remembered that that had been a different visit to a different wrong universe, that the dimensional transit had taken them from there to here, that the boundary between universes was compromised in ways that the 3 days of Cadia had not given him time to fully assess. "Calgar," he said. "Yes. The dimensional boundary," he said. "Our transit compromised it. Not just in the Star Wars galaxy, between universes in general." He paused. "What came through our breach to attack Cadia was OZ technology from our own universe. What came through the warp breach was chaos." He looked at the chapter master. "But the dimensional boundary that our transit compromised connects to more than 2 universes." Calgar looked at him. "How many?" he asked. Hero ran the calculation. The dimensional physics that Wing Zero's sensors had been mapping since their first transit. The specific geometry of the boundary between universes. The way the compromised sections connected to other sections. the network of dimensional intersections that the transit had destabilized. "I don't know yet," he said. "But potentially," Calgar said. "Potentially," Hero said. "It's every universe that shares a dimensional boundary with this one." The silence that followed was the specific silence of two military minds arriving at the same conclusion from the same information, and finding the conclusion significantly worse than either had been working with before. "Then this is not finished," Calgar said. "No," Hero said. "It's not." He looked at the stars, at the burning 41st millennium around them, at the galaxy that had been at war for 10,000 years, and was about to discover that the wars it had been fighting were not the only wars available to it, that the dimensional boundary compromise had opened connections to conflicts and threats and entire universes that the 41st millennium had no knowledge of and no preparation for. And somewhere beyond the dimensional boundary, in the universes that the transit had connected to this one, in the conflicts and the factions and the forces that those universes contained, something had felt the connection open and was looking through it. At the 41st millennium, at 5 mobile suits, at a galaxy that was already burning, and deciding what to do about all of it. Did Cadia's survival truly save the Imperium? Or did 5 Gundams from another universe just open a door that 10,000 years of Imperial history never prepared anyone to close? Cadia stood. The 13th Black Crusade had broken against the Fortress World's walls, and the 5 machines that had come from nowhere and fought for nothing except the people who needed protecting. Abaddon had withdrawn. The Talon of Horus was gone. The Imperium had survived what had nearly been its ending, and in the aftermath of that survival, 5 pilots from a universe that ran on different physics were sitting at the edge of a galaxy that ran on 10,000 years of war and deciding whether it was their responsibility to stay. It was. They knew it was. The dimensional boundary was compromised. The connections it had opened were real and were not closing, and what was looking through them from the other side had not yet decided to come through, but was deciding. The Imperium of Man had been preparing for threats from within its own universe for 10,000 years. It had no preparation for what came from outside it. But it had 5 Gundams, and 5 Gundams, as the 41st millennium had just discovered, were significantly more than nothing. The stars burned above Cadia. The Eye of Terror was quieter than it had been in decades. And at the edge of the system, in the maintenance bay of a machine that had entered the warp and returned, a pilot looked at the dimensional boundary his transit had compromised and began the only calculation that mattered. Not how to get home, how to make sure there was a home to return to. May the Force be with you. More stories await.